So I call this meeting to order at 5:31 p.m. And then we'll move on to roll call. So I see Bajorn's here. Dee won't be here. Joffrey's here. Who else? Naive, Sean, and Rehan. Is that it?
That is all that I'm seeing on there. It looks like we're missing Andrea and Judy and Greg.
Okay.
And Funing.
Okay. And so then we'll move on to agenda approval. Does anybody motion to approve this week's agenda? Naive motions. Does anybody second? Rehan seconds. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those not in favor? I'm assuming Joffrey's is just, is the not in favor? Okay, all those, abstentions? Abstentions, I see 1, so it's 6, 1, 1. Is that what I got?
I think, Greg, were you voting to abstain on the agenda?
Yeah, that was abstaining, yeah. Because I just came in late, so I didn't know what we were voting on.
Okay.
I appreciate you just abstaining, not knowing what it is. But.
Okay, so
I think we only have so many, so I think it was actually 4-1-1, because I think we only have 6 voting members besides you, Stephanie.
Okay, then. So
everyone moves around when they raise their hand in my little Hollywood Squares thing, so it's hard to keep track.
Okay, so I would say motion passes 4-1-1. Moving on to approval of last week's minutes. Does anybody motion to approve last week's minutes? Joffrey motions. Does anybody second? Rehan seconds. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3.
We actually had a brief discussion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it would be the second if there's any discussion.
Yeah, I know we usually bypass that. Was I incorrect in saying last meeting I remember, but it was 2 weeks ago. I remember we were trying to like get a comprehensive sheet of how programs had affected people rather than doing it individual basis. And I don't remember if I'm gaslighting myself or not.
I don't know if it was for anyone. You cut out in the part of that. You said last week we talked about a comprehensive something program
cut levels for the programs rather than having them each reported individually.
Oh, so I think that's for fiscal 22, correct? Or sorry, for this year.
Yeah, the cuts that were put in place this year.
Yeah. So we are still kind of working on that, but we will, I think it'll probably be our last meeting, but we will work on a list for what that impact looks like.
Okay, I just wanted to make absolutely sure.
Yep. Yeah, Lacey was going to have that under one of her advisor reports once we have that.
All right, thank you. Didn't mean to rush you. I was deluding myself.
Okay, and I also see that Judy and Andrea just came in too. So yeah. I continue on with like the voting, right?
Unless there's any other comments or discussion on the motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, so
if not seeing none, we would go to all those in favor again.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those not in favor?
I think there was 8 with Joffrey as well.
Oh, 8, okay. Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion passes 8-0-0. And then we'll move on to reports. I don't have any reports from D, so I'll move it on to the advisors.
I do not have any reports today.
I have 3. One is super quick, which is simply just the fact that as a reminder, again, with us meeting every 2 weeks, our next meeting will be May 18th, and it's our last scheduled meeting for the year, knowing that that would put us kind of at the end of the quarter, which is crazy, or the end of the academic year, which is crazy to think of. Not to panic anyone with that. So just that's one part. The other part is just an update in advance, because I'll talk about it in a minute, but just as a reminder, one of our new business items have coming up. I'm saying it now, so before anyone preemptively jumps in there, we do have to be mindful, given that what the request is does have a number of you who serve on this committee who are either directly impacted as ASCW board members or who work for or with the ESC. So any of you who have those on the committee will have to abstain from the discussion and the voting. Now, you can make comment during public comment just as anyone can, but for the rest of you, and it's about half of you who are on the committee will have to abstain from the rest of that, just as a heads up before we jump into it. And then the last one I have is just a follow-up. So Monash Dash reached out to them following our meeting last week or last time regarding their program review and asked them to be able to come and attend. So I have it listed on here, but there is a brief request that I said I'd bring to you all. Javier, who's the program manager for Monash Dash, that would be the only time they'd be able, which is our last meeting, right, coming up on the 18th. However, they also do coach a little league team at 6 o'clock. And so their request is either if we come in, if they do have to be here and be present live in our meeting, that they be first on the agenda, or we're requesting, is there any other alternative? The challenge I let them know is we don't have other meeting times, because they're like, I can meet any other time except Wednesday evenings to make it work, and knowing it's our last meeting. So I'll leave it to you all if there's anything. In my mind, there'd really be 3 options. One is have them come and be very first on the agenda, pretty much right after we approve the roll call, the agenda minutes. Have him jump in and do his piece where we ask the questions, would be option 1. Option 2 is if you all know what questions we want to ask, we can submit those and get a response in writing, but that does prevent us from being able to have a dialogue back and forth, but that would be option number 2. Or option number 3 is if we look at slightly moving our meeting up on the 18th to be slightly earlier, to give a little bit more time. Now that would require everyone to be able to be present for us to have quorum though. So with that, I'm going to leave it open to you all. If there's nothing on here, then I'll really let him know we do need him to come on the 18th. He'll be first on the agenda, but I at least wanted to provide those other alternatives to you all and see what you think.
Yeah, I think those are great options. I'm personally open to moving the meeting up or having just the written report and Q&A sort of thing.
Looks like Andre, you're in favor with what Judy just said. Okay. Bjorn?
I would also be in favor of moving the meeting up. The only concern I have with doing like the written responses is that there's a lot of broad questions that a lot of people had, it seemed. So we would want to be able to, do it comprehensively, and that can be accomplished in writing. It just seems a little more difficult, but I also want to respect like everybody's time, including Javier's. So.
I'm as well okay.
Yeah,
I agree with Bjorn and Andrea and Judy as well.
So it sounds like you all might be in favor of moving the meeting up for our last meeting. I'm going to leave it because someone will have to make a motion in a second. We have to vote on whether or not you all want to have that meeting be moved up early to 5 or 5:15. I know we obviously have to have a quorum of you all to be present. And so I don't know if you all have thoughts or opinions. I know some of you may have other obligations. And so if you do, and you know you can't do 5 or 5:15, that 5:30 is the only time that works for this last meeting, please share that with the group now. Otherwise, I'll leave it open for someone to make a motion to move our last meeting to a different time.
Yeah, I motion to move the time from 5:30 to 5 o'clock.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand.
I'd say any discussion in case there is
Oh,
any
I'm
discussion.
sorry, any discussion?
In case anyone is not able to do 5 o'clock that is here currently as a voting member. All right, seeing no discussion, you can go to the voting.
Okay, I'm sorry. All those in favor, raise your hand. Eight. All those not in favor? Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion passes 8-0-0. And then we can move on to Joffrey if you have any reports.
I have two, probably only one, because the second one is going to be talked about in a little bit. But the first one is ASCW election finished, and congratulations to the members over to attendees right now who have gone through. I think Mariah, Louise, they're here. Congratulations on that, and look forward to working. I won't be there, but look forward to probably seeing you all next year or so. The second part is that in a public meeting, ASCW voted to utilize the board's fund for EAC graduation, and funds will be going majorly towards entertainment equipment and decorations and maybe graduation memorabilia. And so any balance will be again transferred back into ASCW budget. Historically, these organizations were funded, but because of the budget constraint this year, there hadn't been adequate funding in order to support their program. And so, this, I think, Lacey or Joey, you got the breakdown of how the funds will be used, right? Is that correct?
We do, Joffrey, and that's going to be presented coming up on the agenda. So we'll go over that when we get to there. But yeah,
Okay.
we got it.
So I would not be saying a whole lot of things, maybe like you said, because of a potential conflict of interest, but I'll be also glad to answer any question that may arise. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joffrey. So moving on to other business communications received. Joseph? No? Okay, so I'll move on then to public comment. Does anybody have a public comment to make? Seeing none. Mariah?
Sorry, my connection has been unstable, so I missed out on before Joffrey started speaking. So is this a public comment section in regards to the voting item?
It's public comment in general, Mariah. So any public comment anyone wants to make on the upcoming item, they can make it here, but it's general public comment, period.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify, but yes, just to reiterate what Joffrey just mentioned in our public meeting earlier this week, we voted to use ASCW BOD funds for the 4 ESC graduations. And again, these funds would go towards equipment, decorations, graduation memorabilia. And I believe we sent over and you can correct me if I'm wrong, just like kind of a breakdown of like how many attendees and estimated students in attendance for each graduation. So I can go ahead and share that if need be. So for Raisa's grad, they have an estimated 90 students in attendance, totaling at 360. Phil grad, they have a total of 90. Black grad, 180. And lastly, lab grad is 46 students in attendance, and each graduation gets a max of 3 guests or 4 per student, just to clarify. But yes, the estimated total of students served across all these graduations is 188. And just to give some context to this, our ESC graduations are a really, really big deal to our marginalized communities, specifically within ESC. Our students put a lot of hard work and passion to make these happen each year. And typically in previous years, they've received more funding from the Dean of Student Success. This year has been extremely difficult due to not receiving that funding due to budget constraints like Joffrey had mentioned. So we have found ourselves in a really difficult position, having to scramble for money just to pull these graduations off, and making sure that we're giving each graduation the support and resources that they need to make these happen, because they are a really big deal. And I'm going to use Raisa's grad as an example. A lot of people within community in the Latinx community, it's a really big deal to get a bachelor's degree, and not many of us get a bachelor's degree. A lot of them are first generation college students. So these celebrations are really momentous, and it's supposed to be a time to gather and celebrate and really commend each other for this huge accomplishment. And it's been really hard this year trying to get funds to help cover all those costs. In the beginning, we were having difficulties with even covering the costs for like families and non-CWU students. And that really says a lot. And I think it's just a part of a greater issue we have as a university of not being able to provide the funding that our students need for these graduations, and every year is just a different battle. And that's why we had this voting item, because we have the funds to help support Raisa's grad, which is one of our larger ESC graduations. And, you know, I know that with process and everything and the deadlines coming up, but it's a huge deal to our students and to their families, and we just want to do whatever we can to help them, especially if we have the money to help support them. So that is why we brought forth this voting item. And yeah, I just want to open the floor if anyone has any questions at all.
Joe, do we move that to the next part for new business?
Well, yeah, we wouldn't do questions until we do the presentation, because it's still, if there's any other public comment from anyone else.
Yeah, you did a
then
public
we'll-
comment. Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty,
It's
sounds
okay.
good. Thank you.
But thank you for that, Mariah. Now we're moving on to new business. So it's ACWU based.
Joffrey has his hand up, actually, Stephanie. I don't know if he has I think he has a public
Joffrey?
comment.
Yeah. Yeah, as a part of my public comment, due to the time constraint here and the urgency and the need for this, I think as we deliberate, we should be aware of that, and we should be best at heart and trying to, you know, think about this very well, because it's highly needed. It's highly helpful to support further students, you know, going into this and ESC org, you know, needing this funding. We should be very mindful of the urgency of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joffrey. I see Mariah also has her hand up.
Yeah, just to add on to that and the urgency of it, you know, there's a lot of pressure put on our ESC graduation committees to put on these really big events. And I urge us to really like consider that too, and thinking about this funding, because there's been a lot of stress circulating within the graduations just due to upcoming dates, and just how big of a deal they are, and we have done our best to try and help fund them. We've utilized a lot of our ESC budget, and that's not even taking into consideration the programming that every organization does throughout the year, such as like Barrio Fiesta, which is coming up, and African Night. So we have really tried to utilize our budget, and that's why we are asking for more funds through our ASCWU general budget.
Okay, I'm just gonna say again, if anybody needs to make a public comment before we move on to new business. Yadi?
All right, hi. I am one of the actual lead planners for Raisa's grad. I am a member of METRA, so I am helping put this on. And a comment I want to make, I was there at the ASU public meeting on Monday for advocating for the funding for the grads. It's been really hard for us to plan this event when at the beginning we were told we'd have to use our org's own funding. And when we are such a huge org due to the diversity here on campus, with how many Latinx students we have who are dedicated members, it's really hard to use that org's funding for a graduation ceremony when it was so sudden and so stressful, I'd say, for us leads and our committee as well. And I know personally speaking, as a Latinx first-gen student here on campus, I come from a low-income family, and the fact that I knew families would have to pay out of pocket due to the funding the lack of funding we had, that we were able to change, but still it was very frustrating to know that as a diverse school, like the most diverse school here in Washington State, that we don't have enough funding for our diverse students here on campus, and that it almost had to come out of the org's funding and the parents' funding. But also our graduation is next week. It is on the 14th, and that is why we would need the funding in a way, because I know it takes time for us to get funding, but when our graduation that is for 350 people is in a week and a half, that funding we are in need of could be used now.
All right. Thank you, Yadi, for your comment. I really appreciated it, and I'm pretty sure everybody here did as well. So I'm gonna just repeat again, if anybody has to make any other public comments, now is the time to do so. Seeing none, I'll move on to new business, which is ACWU base funding request to transfer $8,000 of allocation to ESC graduation celebrations.
And I think we've already gotten the main part of it there. So I don't know if there's anything additional in terms of the request itself that Joffrey or Mariah, you two want to share. I know Lacey or I can share some of the specific budget number pieces that were shared with us, but anything before we share the budget breakdown with the committee, in addition, you two want to share? We technically have 10 minutes to present the request.
I don't have anything too specific. I just want to clarify that the 8,000 is just a total, and 2,000 would be allocated to each graduation. So 2,000 for AISA's, Phil grad, Black grad, and Laugh grad.
Okay, I see Lacey has her hand up.
Yeah, so this isn't really about the presentation, but I did want to kind of put a clarifying piece for the S&A committee. So it says on the agenda there would be a transfer, but for the committee's purpose, what this really means for you all is that the ASCW Board of Directors is actually asking to allocate money that is different in their change of base funding. So it's not necessarily going to be looked at as like a transfer. It's going to be that they're allocating money to help, or they're requesting, sorry, to allocate money to help support the ESC grad celebrations. And so we've kind of gone through some people coming through and kind of updating their base funding definition. And this is one of those things that ties into it. It's just that they're tying it into a specific program. So please let me know if that makes sense or if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Lacey.
I guess the part that I'd add on to what Lacey said is really what you all, if there is the need. Now, again, I need to be mindful that 4 of the 9 of you have to abstain, which means it puts the pressure on those of you who are not associated with ACWU or ESC, is it's really making a motion for you all to approve ACWU using their allocation this way, since it's not what was mentioned in their base funding request within it. So it's really a clarification from the committee that yes, while the money was allocated for this, we are comfortable with it being used for this other purpose based on all the things that have been shared already. So, and I guess my question, Mariah, is, and maybe this is for Lacey, because I know the budget breakdown we have is slightly different than I think with what you shared. It's the total amount, but they had a breakdown that was slightly different. I don't know if it's been updated since this email was sent to me yesterday. So I think it had.
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to clarify that, yeah, I made a mistake with that. The numbers that you have are more recent update after meeting with Brandon and Circuit Accounting, but I don't have those right now. So if you would like to share those, that would be much appreciated.
Well, if I could jump in right now, what I would advise is to look at, for the S&A committee, is to look at the $8,000 figure. It does help us on the accounting side to look at the total allocation, and that is what went through with the ASCW public meeting. We do have a breakdown of what's estimated, but depending on how things all go, shipping could play a factor of that. So if my advice would be to look at this as an $8,000 request, as opposed to having it break down per grad, but now you just know that it is that there is going to be 4 celebrations, I believe, right? Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to add to what Mariah and the allocated money. There's only 4 celebrations, and some of them are, I think one of them is online. So most of the money wouldn't really even be used, like the full 8,000. And they're really just asking for help because they do have a budget already. And I know Circuit Accounting also helps them like to budget, and it's just, they really had a big constraint, and they really needed help with funds, especially to make sure that these historically marginalized communities are able to enjoy these celebrations with their families and their parents and their friends and whoever they choose to invite. So, yeah. But Joe, I don't know if anybody, are they presenting still, or?
I mean, I don't believe there's any more presenting. I'm looking at the people. So if there's any questions from the committee about the presentation.
I see Amber's hand was up first.
I think Lacey might have beat me too. Lacey, okay. All right. So, hey everyone, Amber Hofer. I'm gonna have my camera off because of my connection, but I'm one of the advisors for ASCW, as many of you know. And so I just wanted to take a moment to co-sign, since I'm the professional budget manager, that since the board, we like them to budget and take the lead on allocating their funds, that I'm in support of how they're gonna provide these funds to ESC in the up to $2,000 per graduation. And so just want to share that.
Thank you, Amber. Lacey?
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. I think one of the main questions that I have is that with our current policy with S&A committee is that we won't vote on this until the 18th meeting, which is in 2 weeks from now. And my notes say that the first graduation actually starts on, or graduation celebration starts on May 14th. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
So with that being said, I guess this is going to be kind of a statement / question, is that I would say I would be concerned on being able to actually purchase and get things physically here in that time frame. Has there been talk about a plan, like a backup plan for that, knowing that one of the celebrations will happen before actually the next meeting.
Joffrey, do you have something to add to that?
Oh, actually, this was going to come as a request to the whole committee. Is that because of the sheer urgency for this, I was probably asking if we might be willing to make a change and maybe meet on the 11th again for potential voting on this. That is just my request for the committee.
And I'll jump in just for procedural pieces, because Joffrey, keep in mind, is a presenter here on that. And so we as the committee can discuss that, those again who don't have to abstain, after you all finish asking any questions you have, because that'll kind of be the next steps that we'll jump into. So this is the part, if there are any other questions for the request, to bring them up.
Lacey?
Let me try and rephrase that question a little bit. What would be the impact to the celebration if we weren't able to get this approval or get it approved in time?
Yadi, I don't want to call you out, but if you would want to, you or Mariah would want to add to that.
Yeah, I could jump in. Like, again, like I expressed earlier, the importance of it, but by not getting these funds, essentially Rice's grad wouldn't be able to put on a meaningful event the way that they want to and have in the past. And like I said, there's a lot of pressure put on all these graduation committees to put on these really like impactful events. And a lot of people attend these, like our executive leadership team and other members of the community. And by not allocating these funds, they're not going to be able to provide all the necessary decorations, equipment, and things like that that they need to have their full celebration. So I don't want that to happen, because this is a really big deal, especially for the graduates and their families as well, who will be traveling and coming to celebrate them. So it's a really, really big deal. And I know it's a big ask, but we just want them to have a really good, meaningful graduation.
Does anybody else have Bjorn?
Yeah, you guys heard about this like last week from Student Success. They were just like, nope, not going to give the money, like very quickly. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking coherently. You got the news that you wouldn't be able to fund it as normal like last week or something, right?
I think, can I answer that question, Ryan? If you're okay with that. Well, they've been knowing they have had like budget constraints, or actually, yeah, I think Yadi could answer that question since she is like one of the planners. So if Yadi, if you want to speak on it.
More to Maya, but to clarify, when I joined the planning committee, we were not aware of the lack of funding up until our first meeting with accounting, when we realized it would be coming out of our own pockets. And then I essentially advocate to get the expenses that parents and families would have to pay to get in. So that's been an issue since the very beginning, but it's just gotten to the point where the orgs themselves shouldn't be and cannot fund these events ourselves. When we are putting on the events for our members and students and I can speak for myself, fellow Latinx students, graduates here on campus, that's been an issue on that. But I also just wanted to add to Mariah what she said for the impact on the funds that we could use. I know the graduation is in fact in a week. It's quite literally in 10 days, but these funds would be used to get stuff for our graduation, because I feel like if with the right amount of funding we'd be capable of putting on a graduation, the committee ourselves would be very proud to have put on for our seniors. Our seniors deserve a really good graduation. I know a lot of seniors are probably like first generation, and some of the first in their family to graduate. So the fact that I feel like the impact this money could use on them would be like, we could use it for not even just like decor and stuff, but just to make sure this graduation goes smoothly for them. And it's not so much of budget reasons we have to abstain from giving them this graduation that they essentially deserve and should have, because I know we're the first graduation, but we're also the largest graduation that will be happening. Our graduation will be 350 people. And I think the funding would go to really good use for us. And that, yeah.
Mariah?
I'm sorry, just to bounce off of that. The most frustrating part about all of this and just ESC graduations and the struggles we've all had so far is that we're constantly having to ask and jump extra hoops just to get the funding, to get the things that these graduations need. And right now with the current funds that they have, you know, it's not enough, and it doesn't do these graduations any justice. Right now, the orgs are just working with what they have. They're not necessarily able to purchase every single thing like on their like quote unquote wish list that they need for it. Hence why we're asking for more funds so that they can get every single thing that they need for the graduation.
Joe?
I am so sorry, you guys.
Oh, sorry. Joe?
Were you about to say something, Bjorn, or were you just, I don't know if you were jumping in there to ask a question, or?
I was
You
saying
said-
that I'm super sorry for all these funding crunches and everything. I did have a different question, like a procedural question though. Is it theoretically possible to give, like, since our next meeting is as scheduled is the 18th, and if we moved it up to the 11th, which that would give like 3 days to purchase stuff. Is it possible to reconfigure this 8,000 to be like a credit thing? I don't remember what it's called, but you go to circuit counting and they give you the money that you spent, or is that at all possible?
I like to jump in. So I think what you're trying to say is a reimbursement. And so as a general statement, yes, circuit counting can reimburse students for things. We do it all the time. I would say I would be concerned about that, mostly because it's a pretty large expense to put on a student, even if it is for a short period of time. And so I think, is it possible? Yes. Is it feasible? I'm a little hesitant on saying that. And I do want to say that even if we have a meeting on the 11th, that is a very tight timeline for an event on the 14th. So I still want to make sure I voice my concern on the timeline of that.
Macy, can I ask a question? Would they have to find like a sponsorship then?
That is a possibility. Yes.
I do want to jump in because we are over the 10 minutes for the request. Now the committee can choose to extend it if we have more questions. If we're moving into the next part that's not questions about the request and we're talking about process, we don't need to extend anything, but it's moving now beyond the presentation. So I'm leaving it for the committee. If anyone does want to extend or feel the need, you have more questions. Otherwise, we'll go into the next steps with this. I just want to point out we're over time.
Bjorn?
I would move that we extend discussion until all questions are answered, given the gravity of this request. There probably aren't that many questions anyways.
I would recommend we put a time limit on that.
Okay. Maximum of 10 more minutes? Yeah, that's my motion.
So Bjorn motions to extend it an extra 10 minutes. Does anybody second? Joffrey seconds. All those in favor? Actually, should we do a discussion, Joe?
I mean, you can open it for discussion if there is any. I will remind, given that there's some conflict of interest, that certain people are going to have to abstain from the vote on this, even though it's not voting about the request itself. So
yeah.
and I guess I will say this in case there is anyone else, so correct me if anyone I say is not correct in here. I know that the individuals who are going to have to abstain from the discussion and the voting are going to be Stephanie, Joffrey, Andrea, and Jude. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong with anyone else who's a voting member, if there is anyone who works for or with ACW, ESC, or advises one of the orgs who's doing a graduation.
Okay.
So those individuals will have to abstain from the vote as we move forward. But yeah, any discussion on the vote for the extending it by 10 minutes, Bjorn? Nope, he was not.
No, I was going to say that I'm going to abstain from the final vote because I'm a former member of ASCWU, but I'm still allowing myself to like ask procedural questions and such because I former and I didn't work with ESC.
Judy?
Oh, procedural question. So are we allowed to make motions and just not vote?
No, not really. You shouldn't make a motion either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for asking, Jude.
Okay. So Joe, can we still proceed then if it was?
I think we're fine because Bjorn Bjorn is choosing to abstain. He does not have a direct conflict, and so he made the motion. So I think we're fine to vote on extending it by 10 minutes.
All right then. So then moving on to voting, if I can have all those in favor raise their hand.
To vote to extend the questions for 10 minutes.
And then those who should abstain could wait for that part. Okay. Can we all vote again? Just because I know some of them, the ones that were supposed to abstain, voted. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 4. Although 5. All those not in favor? Any abstentions? I know Judy and Joffrey have to abstain, so motion passes 5-0-3. Yeah, okay then. So yeah, if anybody has any questions to add, I would say to do so now. We do have 10 minutes, so yeah. Joe?
So the question that I had, and I think this was mostly to make sure if this answered Bjorn, because I think this is where Bjorn was coming from with his question about the finding out last week was, and I apologize, Mariah, if you had said this earlier within it, but I think it was mostly so it's clear for the committee about knowing you all found some of this out. Was it that it's coming to S&A now just because you didn't know you had the option of going and asking ACWU, or was it with ACW not knowing they had funding available? Pretty much, I think it would be helpful for the committee to know the time frame of why we didn't get the request earlier, knowing I know the planning's been going on for a while, but just to help the committee understand.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was more of a matter of not knowing whether we could use the funds, just because we are very careful with kind of language and also what we're able to provide, especially for like non-CW students. Like we know that we can't use S&A dollars for non-CW students, right? So I think it was more of that, and knowing that we have that budget and we can use it to help support the graduations, and these are really like important to the board. Like this was like our main priority right now, is just finding a way to help them. Another thing I do want to point out, now that I recall earlier when I was talking to Brandon, is that as far as like a plan B or a backup plan, we do have rollover for next year, and it is 700. And essentially we could use that to go towards Raisa's grad, but then we wouldn't have any money left over for ESC, and we do a lot of programming. We have an ESC night market coming up, and we want to get hoodies and sweaters for our ESC reps and ASCWU board leaders. So that would put a really big strain on our general budget for ESC. But we would essentially use that money for Raisa's grad just because it is coming up and it's one of our larger graduations. as far as the other graduations, there's still more wiggle room just because like their graduations are coming on later in the month or into next month as well. So right now, our main focus is like trying to find ways to help Raices grad just because it's so soon. Like they mentioned, it's next week. So that's been very stressful. But I hope that gives some more clarity as to why we're asking and kind of just answering your question as well, Lacey, as far as like, is there a backup plan? And one last thing, I'm so sorry. It's been a day and all this information is just like kind of up in the air, but it's been a really big struggle this year with graduation planning. And, you know, we have all just been scrambling just to like make this happen. And we haven't been getting enough support from our advisors and things like that. And we should have started these graduation planning like way in ahead of events. But unfortunately, we started late and that's kind of on us, but also it's just been a very difficult year and trying to find funding to help support the graduations.
Thank you, Mariah. Joe, I hope that answered your question. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? We still have some time. Leon?
I just saw Amber's hand just before the time limit was up in response to, I think, the question about doing like the, I'm forgetting the name again, Lacey, but the delayed payment.
Reimbursement.
Reimbursement, word of the day.
Thanks. No, I appreciate it. I had a couple of questions and it's not a very well thought out question, so it might turn out to be a comment, but I think my question is around where the board has some autonomy or authority or ability to kind of make some of these decisions. So the entire ASCW board voted to support this and approve this and oversee the board of directors budget for the purpose of serving the student body. And so I guess my question is it, would a smaller number or different purpose, like where does the board's authority start and end? Since most of the funds would be allowable funds, where do they have discretion, I guess is the question, to kind of allocate some of these funds?
Joe?
Yeah, and I'll jump in there. So really to answer your question, Amber, this comes up because it's going back to the ASCW BOD's base funding request, specifically what was requested and worded in their thing for what was funded. And this one is an interesting one because if you go back and look on the website at the request, it specifically said that this budget was primarily for salary and not for programming. So even though it would fit within the allowable expenses, because the budget was really allocated for positions, not for programming, is why the committee would need to provide like, yes, we're fine with you using it for these programming purposes instead of for the original allocation of the staff positions. Even if you get into the breakdown, I think it only had $4,000 listed prospectively as programming for the entire year for ASCW BOD. So it's mostly to make sure we're being consistent with what was asked and allocated, since they specifically said that. If they had not been as specific in their request and had more money set aside in their prospective budget for programming, it would probably not need to go before the committee.
Okay, thanks. I have another question, but let me stew on it a little bit.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add or to ask Mariah and anybody else presenting? Amber?
Okay, I'm going to take a shot at my question. I guess my follow-up question to that, Joey, is back to, I think, how the purpose of student fees, then S&A dollars as a whole. And I think that while they're allocated to different budgets, I think it's at the discretion of the budget managers to make sure it's still serving the students within the larger purpose. And so I might be digging myself into a hole here. But I'm curious because I think that if the Rice's grad is in a week and the board has the ability to buy some decorations to support some of the members of the student body, what I think within the context of their budget, it would be similar purposes as they have used the funds in the past, I think, to do different programs and events for students and supporting them in different ways. And so I guess my question is around where does the gray area on that initial request begin and end?
The gray area honestly depends on the request, Amber. So like I said, so going back, and we can pull up specific ones to look at. Some are worded generally. And so like a great example, I'll pick on an area not here, is DEC. They have what their mission and pieces, and that they have a set large amount set aside for programming, as long as that dollar figure is close within there. I think the hard part with this one, again, because it really is intended for those areas to determine. However, because the request that came forward in base funding said it was not for programming, and that funding for programming was going to be under the other ASCW budgets, and they outlined that it was only $4,000 for minor programming, is where the committee has to come. Because really, and it's not up to me, if the reason is to be clear, because if the committee in the future were to come back and say, ASCW BOD, you spent this money outside of what it was allocated for, the committee could choose to change or reduce the funding, feeling it is not being allocated or spent on what it was intended for. So it's really a procedural piece to go before the committee to say, hey, we're not needing it for these purposes, which Joffrey and Mariah kind of outlined. And there is this other piece that we would like to support with the money, even though it is outside of what was initially requested and allocated by the committee. But we can talk more procedurally to go over some of this, unless you want the whole, because the committee can give feedback on it as well. If you were on the committee before, I know this one specifically because of the wording that ASCW BOD had in their base funding request.
Cool, thank you. I might have more questions later, but I think I'm good for now.
Okay, Mariah?
I do want to acknowledge, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but typically we haven't dipped into ASCW funds to help fund the ESC graduations, but this has been a really difficult year and the need has been very much higher, just because, again, orgs and have been like scrambling for money because we didn't get as much as we normally would in any given year, like prior to COVID. And we've received a lot more in the past, even like from the deck specifically. Like this year, the DC only allocated $300 to each graduation, which is really not anything, considering that graduations in the past have cost anywhere from thousands of dollars. So I just want to acknowledge that, you know, hopefully we find a longer term solution to this, but you know, it's always just been a really big struggle trying to help fund these graduations. And again, we did start up very late. Normally graduation planning starts pretty earlier on, just so we can figure out all these like little kinks and smoothing things out. Normally orgs would do fundraisers, but due to numerous factors, it just has been super difficult trying to get funds.
Joe, would that be, it looks like we're out of time for the 10
I was
minutes.
just going to say we're out of time.
Okay.
So with that, I mean, I'd move to the procedural piece here because I think this is now beyond the questions. And so thank you to the presenters for the information. Now for the members, the 5 of you who can vote, is we have a few options. So essentially procedurally, and I will cover as the procedural advisor what this looks like, and then allow Lacey to come and contradict me in a second with her recommendation. procedurally, because it's presented now, we would vote on it at our next meeting, which is scheduled for the 18th. As a reminder, the reason behind that is to make sure is this is a public meeting that is open to everyone and it's recorded, that anyone who wants to provide feedback during public comment before we vote is able to provide that public comment now that the request has been made, but also for the committee to consider the request itself. I think the options we have is either leaving it where it is, and so we would then vote on it at our meeting on May 18th. I don't have it in front of me. Yeah, May 18th.
Yeah, it's 18th.
Thank you. I know there was a recommendation or request made in the presentation by Joffrey of potentially having us schedule an additional meeting next week that is on there. And so it would still be voting at our next meeting. It would just be adding a meeting in there and providing the updated comment. Or the other option is potentially having the discussion of making the motion to vote on this during this meeting. Again, the challenge with the voting on it during this meeting is it does limit the ability as a transparent public thing for people to provide public comment within this. But I'll let Lacey say the flip side from the financial part. I'm assuming will come.
Yes. So, I mean, I will say, I do agree that there is a piece when we're talking about public meetings, we do want to make sure that we're trying to be intentional about having this be as public as possible. That's the intent of government funding, so that we can make sure that all of our customers and students, all those people understand what we're doing. So that is a statement that I stand by. But as financially as this goes, it will be extremely difficult to be able to facilitate purchasing these items that quickly after, even if we added the 11th meeting and having 2 days to do that, if we have to, I mean, it's just going to be really difficult. I don't want to necessarily tell you we can't do it, but I don't know how it would impact that first graduation celebration. And so at the end of the day, the decision is the committee's, but I do want you to know that at the end, like if we do wait on this, there will be a potential negative outcome on one of the celebrations, just due to timing of being able to get supplies and ordering and getting the approvals for all of those things sorted out before the 14th.
And so I'll say this at this point, and I hate to call anyone specifically out, but this really does leave it to Bjorn, Knife, Rehan, Greg, and Sean. If there is any consideration the 5 of you would like to make about an adjustment to the process or our meeting schedule, we would need to make that probably now. Otherwise, this would simply continue and be on the agenda for the May 18th meeting if there's no motion or action. So I say that because I want you 5 to know that it's you 5 who are going to have to be the only ones discussing it. And Lacey and I can answer questions on it, but that's the extent to where we can kind of fall.
Greg, do you have something to add?
I don't know. Let's move on. Let's motion to pass this. Let's accept it. What do we do?
So we have to motion to vote on it during this meeting first, Greg, and then we would vote on it. Because essentially we'd be motioning to change our process. But I think Bjorn had a question unless he's jumping into the motion.
Yeah, the question was, hypothetically, will we get in any trouble if we decide to vote on it this meeting? Because it's a very single thing, you know?
I think the question would be, Bjorn, what do you consider getting in trouble? You all have the ability and it's dictated down to you. I think the part you may get is, and we don't have a lot of requests, but from a consistency standpoint, if there were other requests, they would potentially want to know why we didn't vote the same evening, or if there were people who did have public comment opposed to. So I mean, there's an operational piece to it, but we would not be penalized. If anything, I may get a reminder on what the policy and process is, but you all would not have any repercussions, no.
I think there's a history where we have done this before, but I might be wrong.
I know that wasn't a question, but I will add in there, Greg. I mean, there definitely has been times when the committee has made the decision to vote on a request the same evening it's been presented. So that is not unheard of.
And just to clarify, first they would have to vote on to do this today and then vote to pass the request. Okay.
Yeah, so the initial, if there's a motion, would simply be that we are going to vote on the request tonight. That does not mean that the people voting yes to that would necessarily be voting yes to the request itself. So it'll seem weird because we'd have to do 2 votes back to back with the same individuals.
If anybody has a motion. I see Knife. Do you motion? Or like you have to, he has to say the motion, huh?
Yes, I make a motion to vote on this today.
Okay, Knife motions. Does anybody second that motion?
I second that motion.
Greg seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? Or
No discussion, I think, from looks of it, but again,
Okay.
it's only the 5 who are allowed to be partaking in this discussion
Okay.
who can vote yes or no on it.
okay then. So then we'll move on to voting. And just to keep in mind, those that abstain have to abstain. So wait for that part. But all those in favor, please raise your hand. 4, 5. Those not in favor. Abstentions. Okay, I know Judy also has to abstain, so we'll move on. Motion passes, or it passes 503. Yeah. So we moved it to voting for this meeting. So then somebody also has to motion for the request, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Bjorn, you should, make this motion. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the one I'm abstaining from, so
Oh, you're abstaining from this one.
yeah.
But you just voted. All right, that's it. All right,
He's
so-
not required to abstain, Greg.
Yeah,
To
okay.
let you all
He
know
just,
he was
he's just
going
going to. Thanks, Sean. So Joey, help me out. What's the motion to pass this tonight?
So the motion to pass it would essentially be you are motioning to approve ACWU using $8,000 of their allocation to support ESC graduations.
Exactly. That's my motion to approve ACWU to use $8,000 for their graduations. Sean, it's up to you to second if you want to, buddy.
I will second that motion.
And I
Now
don't know
for
if
discussion.
Stephanie has disappeared.
Oh,
So I guess I'll just move to the next part to ease this along. We have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion on it? Seeing none, all those in favor of allowing ACW to use $8,000 in allocation to support ESC graduations, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Based on what we have, it looks like it passes 404. And I'm trying not to have my dog bark on the recording, but he's going to do it right when I'm doing the thing. So it looks like it passes. Thank you all for that. Oh, and Stephanie's back.
Oh, Joe, it's because my internet went out for a minute, and then I was trying to message Bajorn, but yeah. So thank you.
Yep, we moved past that, so we just approved it, and so I'll give it back to you to take on to old business.
Okay, then. Thank you for everybody being here and participating today. But we are moving on to old business, and it'll be the base funding for program reviews. So yeah, we'll start off with the observer.
And I will just say as a reminder, so we have again 11 of these. Any general comments that we have already made for all of the ones, because we've done that the last few times, right? There's some things that's like, yep, this applies to everyone's program reviews. We don't need to say again. Peggy's done a great job of taking those notes. We'll compile it all together at the end of these. But really, I think with this one, we'll jump in. And if you all have any specific feedback, comments, questions, we'll provide those. But again, for the sake of brevity, if you've already made the comment in a general sense, we don't need to make it again. So with that, as Stephanie said, we'll start with the observer program review. Any feedback, comments, questions based on their program review that you all have?
Joffrey?
I saw it says fiscal 21, and I don't know whether that was just a typo or it was something a little different.
I believe it was Joffrey because they
Okay.
typed it. It's for this fiscal year, which is 22.
Okay.
Not everyone understands what fiscal year means. Go ahead, Bjorn.
Yeah, as usual, I have kind of a scattershot of questions. A couple of times in the observer's application, they kind of alluded to receiving funding from other sources. Like they mentioned having to request stuff from the dean. I just wasn't sure how that all shook out in terms of distribution. I recall that they got like some funding from College of Arts and Humanities, but not a lot. And I may be wrong. The other question I had was just there's the vacancy of the student media business manager. How has that affected funding or how they've been spending it? And then how are procedures going to fill that position?
Those are great questions, Bjorn. I think that the only one I'll somewhat answer is I know we don't know for this year because they haven't given their fiscal report because it's not done in terms of the funding. You can look back on their annual report from last fiscal year and see roughly at least what it was from those other areas, but we'll see when they submit their fiscal report in the fall. But I think that's a good question we can ask. What is the specifics of the other funding that you receive and the impacts of that vacant position in the plan? So any other questions or feedback for the observer? Seeing none, go to the next one. So Office of Case Management. Questions, feedback?
Here.
There's like a comment on the PDF on question 7 noting that the team was temporarily reduced from 4 case managers to 3. We probably weren't supposed to see that comment, but I'm interested, how long was that for and how did it like affect capacity compared to a normal year? The second question was, tell us about this new software program you have. I hear that people are interested in software programs that might potentially replace Presence. Although that's not necessarily an S&A related question, it's kind of a general, depending on what people's interests are.
I think that's a great question. I can tell you Presence is not what they use nor what they will be using. Theirs is a completely different software system. I think that's a great question. Any other questions, either things that stood out to you or things you wanted more information or clarification on, either now or on future program reviews? Awesome. Move on to the next one, Office of International Studies and Programs Program Review. Bjorn. You can go ahead, Bjorn.
Okay. For this one, when I was reading through question 2, I had a little bit of difficulty parsing whether these were like goals or more like ways to achieve those goals. I just wasn't quite certain on the, and it felt like it overlapped a little bit with question 3. It was just a clarification thing. The other thing I had was the family medical leave mentioned in question 8. Since that's coming out of a different acronym budget, does that mean there's a little extra money in the S&A budget for this year? There were a lot of acronyms in there.
I don't know this, but I mean, we can ask that Bjorn. I think that's a valid question. I don't know the specifics of what positions. My assumption, because FMLA is Family Medical Leave Act, and so staff member out, I don't believe that position is funded with the S&A dollars, which is why I think they said they have no vacancies, but I could be mistaken. So we can ask just for that clarification. Other questions, areas you want some more information on? Again, outside of the general feedback we've already given, which will apply to all of them.
I would like to give input on number 4. They did a good job on like pretty much saying how it aligns like generally, but they didn't provide any specifics on how they do that. So that was just something I would personally like to see, like, oh, how are y'all able to make this happen?
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, seeing no others with that one, we'll jump over to, what's the next one I have here? Office of Student Involvement Program Review.
My only comment really is just updating language from sub to circ. Other than that, their information look good.
Just a point, the sub and the circ are 2 different things.
Oh, then maybe clarification on that would be great.
So I mean, I like to add in there because I think that's a really good question. And so the sub, that reference, because you get all of us professional people and we throw out all these short terms and then never describe what that is. What it means is it's the student union fee. And so the circ has the student union fee, and it also has the rec fee, and it also has the S&A fee. And so you'll hear a lot of people be like, oh, it's the sub. Well, what that means is the sub fee, or the, see, I just did it. It means the student union fee.
Okay, that's great to know, because I know that the circ used to be called the sub before it had the rec center. So I just got the language confused. Yeah, good to know.
And we carried it over from the old building to the new building. So you are correct.
Bjorn?
In question 2, there was an allusion to a student involvement assessment plan, like across the board. I was just interested to hear more about that, if it's relevant. There was also an allusion to CLCE, which I guess needs to be updated now that it's SLICE, and interclub association data in, I think, question 6, it looks like. I was just interested to see if we have that data or if we could see it, because I wasn't able to find it when I sifted through a bunch of other stuff. And on number 3, they mentioned staff members work with other groups. I don't know if this is just like collaboration or overlap in services or what. I had a little bit of confusion.
I think that's a valid point, because if you look at, and I think when you're looking at this, I mean, the one part I had is some clarification for the sake of the program review, because question 3, as you referenced, Bjorn, says the budget's designed to support the professional staff members overseeing student engagement experiences. And then if you go to question 6, it's talking about the student staff members in SLICE within it. And so where those are, and also with question 3, when it talks about are there overlaps or intersections with other programs, they somewhat list that they focus on clubs, organizations, engagement, ASCWU. And when you get to question 6, it talks about CLCE, which again is SLICE now, ICA club engagement. So it seems like there is some overlap and intersection that should probably be touched on there, knowing it's all interconnected, but to be clear in answering that question, just a little bit more detail. And I guess the other one I'd say for the sake of the program review is on question 10, clarifying, because it says currently there's one professional staff vacancy that affects our ability to use the intended funding. Wanting to clarify, because there is a mixture of things here when we're talking student involvement and SLICE. Is that professional staff vacancy funded by the student involvement budget, or is that by one of the others? Because again, with it being intermingled, just for the sake of the program review for anyone looking at it to clarify. Any other questions, feedback? Great. Seeing none, we'll move on to, and this one is going to be a combination of 2, which is interesting because the base funding request was one where they combined Office of Undergraduate Research. However, they gave us the program review splitting it into the 2 previous. And so given that some of the information is different, we kept the 2 forms, but you'll see there's the one for student travel and research grants, and there's the one for source. Those are all part of the same base funding one. It used to be separated, this new base funding cycle, it's one request, but given that the answers are slightly different and nuanced, we allowed it for this year since they'd already done it and turned it in. So I'll leave it, well, I guess we can go through whichever one, but either one of those 2, the source or the student travel and research grants program reviews. Bjorn?
Especially with source, I was curious to get a little more data, especially with, since they debuted the virtual one on like center to Ellensburg numbers. That was just a minor clarification, if at all possible.
So really getting some more info and specifics on once we've moved to virtual. Are you saying the impact with the the Ellensburg focused one in the centers, what that looked like with the virtual move?
Yeah, I was curious about demographics in general, but I was especially interested in the center campus, amount of students from center campuses.
I have a clarifying question. So for the program review, just the normal sheet provided for number 7, it says all students apply to our program with their would-it-be student ID. And I don't know if like I'm misinterpreting what they answered or they maybe answered it like I don't want to say wrong, but because it says how many unique CWU students utilize their program services, and they said all students, but it's like how do all students like use
My
it?
guess on that, Andrea, is looking at it. If you look at question 6, because they say in that funding cycle, which we did the previous year, they had 22 students apply for the grants. So I think they assume the answer was up above, not that it's all students, but that they got the demographic information from institutional effectiveness. I think they were answering, how do you gather these metrics? If you don't, how do you prevent it? They didn't quite answer the first part of the question.
Okay.
That's at least how I read it, but we can ask for clarification.
Then that moves to my next point then, because I did figure it was that, but like I was like, am I not getting it right? But so just to clarify that part.
Well, and I think for me putting it in there, I mean, just to touch on it, and I have to move where I put this. I don't know if they have the ability, because they gave the last funding cycle, so 20 to 21. It would be interesting to know, given where we're at for this year. Now, I know they probably filled this out earlier. And by the time we ask the question, it may be the end of this year's funding cycle. So maybe we'll get that information next year, but it's hard to know, given that year was right in the middle of COVID, what the impacts were like. What do they normally see versus what are we seeing that one year? Greg?
Thank you. Both of their, the supplement, the source, and both documents indicate to increase student involvement, to increase faculty involvement, that's a desire of theirs. And it seems like that's been something I've heard for a while. And it'd be interesting to know what their strategies are to increase student involvement and faculty involvement. I don't know, just maybe it's just something to consider, that if we ask the question, at least they will think about what their strategy is.
Thanks, Greg. Any other with either of the two undergraduate research program reviews? Awesome. So we jump over to pet band program review.
Ian.
On question 2, they referenced objectives from like the music department. I was just interested in getting a little more detail on what those are, because I don't know where I would access the music department objectives. On questions 3 and 4, talked a lot about benefits to like the community as a whole, but I was interested in what benefits they see themselves providing for the students who are like playing in pep band. And then on question 11, they referenced a librarian, and I haven't been in band since 3rd grade, so I don't know what a librarian is in this context.
I was gonna ask the same thing for that part.
I can only answer that because this was part of a request we had before. So it's it's a music librarian who keeps all the music and the pep band pieces of there. So
Yep. And I just wanted to add on 6 and 7, they list all their demographics, fantastic, all that. I am kind of just curious where what program they use to get those metrics, just out of curiosity, because athletics is such a huge department that maybe, if it works better than presence, that maybe it could be a suggestion we use. So.
I mean, it's not really a question, but I did find that interesting that their metrics were provided by athletics. And I know pep band works with that, but knowing they know the students in those classes, you're absolutely right. It's an interesting way of getting that info. Although now, and this is maybe the clarification, because now I'm looking at my note on here. I don't know if it's the metrics when we're talking about the demographic piece, or it's the number of students at the games they attended, because that would just be a set number, which would make more sense. But
it looks like, and this is just my assumption, but it looks like it's both, and that they just kind of put the demographics and number in 2 different. Yeah, because the unique students would just be like total number of who re-attended. And because it has the Hispanic Latino option, I think it isn't presence. So I'm just curious what the program is.
yeah, we could definitely ask them. Any other questions, feedback, comments for pep band program review? Nope. Okay, moving on. Publicity Center program review. Questions, comments, feedback?
Yeah, I have another one on metrics. So they mentioned that they get it from 25 Live, Google, what is it? I have my old notes here. Google Analytics, social media, but they don't really list what those metrics are. So I'd just like to know more details.
So going into the wanting more, and I know this is the general feedback we've given before, but just to make sure I know what you said, more specific information about. Got it. The who utilizes the program. And
right. And I think, let me double check there, like for unique attendees, and I'll get back to you if I have any comments on that.
I think some of theirs in reading it, I mean, I appreciate that. I think we can ask that question because again, saying they get metrics from those areas. I know they're a similar one when we talk about some of these others that it's hard to track unique number, given it depends on in what capacity, like you need to track the exact unique number of those who come and essentially have a project with them, but those who see the publicity that's out there virtually or in person, you wouldn't be able to. I mean, similar to what we talk about with the Observer, right?
Right. And I mean, I feel like it would be worthwhile for like virtual platforms and things, because the Publicity Center, to the best of my knowledge, that their primary thing isn't doing events. So they're not going to have unique attendees in the same way that athletics, pep band, anything like that. But maybe like looking at like, how many of the people viewing their content virtually are their followers, things like that, and kind of recategorizing it so that we kind of have a better idea of why we ask them this question.
No, that's great. The other one I had, which I know is kind of listed at the very end of it, was just the currently in process, which I know Lola has shared with us previously, that once that's concluded, to share the full survey results. I know we had a little bit of an update, but was hoping for some more responses from people. And so I think that would be helpful as a supplemental if there is more that comes up later on. But
question 8 mentioned the vacancy was like being filled in conjunction with KCWU. I was just interested in why that was, and budget or both budgets pay for the position. I was also interested on question 10. It looked like they didn't know if they'd been cut yet, and that had been updated and in the intervening several months.
I see what you're saying, Bjorn, on there. Yeah. So just some potential updates on and clarification with some of those. Again, knowing some of these were filled out. Obviously, they were all filled out winter quarter because that's when they were due. We're a little bit further along. Any other questions or feedback for the Publicity Center program review?
I think for number 6, they said who is able to utilize the program, which is like all areas serving student activities, but didn't provide like who actually uses. And I'm sure like they probably were like, oh, like everyone pretty much does, but I feel like it was just maybe misinterpretation. And I also wanted to mention that I appreciated that in number 11, they mentioned the longer term and shorter term growth that they hope to see. So I just appreciated that detail.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrea. Any other? Scanning the squares. All right, seeing none. We'll jump to Pulse program review for Pulse Magazine.
There were a few overlaps and collaborations mentioned. None of those, to my eye, seem to be with other S&A funded groups. So I was just curious if there were any S&A funded groups which there was overlap with. I can probably answer this one myself by going to the documents from last year, but I was also interested how funding was distributed between S&A and the College of Arts and Humanities. And also, they mentioned online distribution in question 6. Were they able to get any metrics from this? Because it's naturally more trackable than a newsstand.
Thanks, Bjorn. Any others specific to Pulse program review as we look at it?
They didn't answer number 7 really. I know it may be one of those like more difficult ones of like who uses or how many unique CWU students utilize the program. But I don't know, I feel like they just completely didn't answer it. They just provided information on how how many copies they print, which yes is important, but again didn't really answer the question.
No, I appreciate that, Andre. And I was noting the same thing, and it seems to imply like there's a reason, but it would be helpful if they answered that part B. If you don't, what's preventing you? We can make assumptions given what we know, but I'd prefer they more succinctly put, here's why, so we're not assuming or filling in the gaps. Seeing no others, we'll jump over to the Sarah Spurgeon Art Gallery program review. Any
Yeah,
questions, feedback? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You're good. I just kind of have the same comments as with the museum. Just, finding a way to gather metrics that doesn't inhibit on like the sort of the flow of traffic, so to speak. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, this one, since it was hard to gather metrics, I was kind of thinking of what could we do to help you gather metrics if possible. The other question I had was no overlaps, especially with other S&A funded areas, but collaborations I'd be interested to hear about, like with club collaborations that were mentioned in question 4.
Great question, Bjorn. I think going back to one of the questions we had mentioned earlier, I don't remember which program review, if you look at question 11, I think it'd be helpful just to know as we talk about what growth or increases, said in the future, the guy would like to increase the diversity of its featured artists and engage in more collaborative interdisciplinary programs. I'd just be interested in how they might go about that or what that would look like, just for general awareness. Any other questions or feedback on the Sarah Spurgeon Art Gallery? Awesome. Seeing none, we'll jump over to Scheduling Center program review.
On question 6, they mentioned, well, previously in the form, they mentioned serving like community members as well. So I was interested to see how scheduling was split between students, faculty, staff, community members, because 7 mostly focused on students. Just to see the scope, I guess.
Great question.
Yeah, I had some concerns on the same question, but also just with their metric of 1.58 million people. I'm just curious on what time frame they're saying that many people go into the CERC, because I can't say that I've ever seen that many people in there at one time. Could be just me. But yeah, so I'm just curious what timeline they're referring to there.
And I guess to clarify, because I'm making an assumption here, and I think I know, but for the sake of the program review, since not everyone is going to be us on that, is they make note that they gather some of this data through door counters. And so I'm assuming that's where they get that 1.5 million people come into the student union. But I think it'd be helpful to clarify that, and what, like you said, Judy, what's that time frame like over the course of this year, or when they say on average, because it also touches on later on in a normal school year, scheduling reserves 20,000 spaces. Is that average of 1.5 million annually over the last 5 years, over the last 2 years? Like, what have we seen recently? So, because I think that's a helpful reference point, but if we don't know how long that average is taking in or what the current usage might be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe like putting out from this year to this year, or because I really can't tell what if it is even yearly. Is that like it's really hard to tell. So
well, and I know these are coming up on our next one when we look at student union operations and things like that. But because I think that's helpful information, but it's also when we get into scheduling, there's a context point, but not all of that directly impacts the scheduling. I think the more specifically, the spaces reserved, the S&A events that use those spaces, that kind of stuff is more directly applicable with it within those. Any others? Sounds like really just asking some more clarification on this one and also maybe some more current, given they say that COVID-19 has drastically impacted space use, to get that reference point of, we know this is what it was before, but what are we seeing currently? Any other questions, comments, feedback for scheduling program review? All right, then we'll move on to the last one, Student Funds Financial Manager program review. Questions, comments, feedback?
Joffrey here.
Yeah, go ahead, Joffrey.
There's a part number 7, and how do you get the metrics and all of that? I would imagine in the financial management, as you track expenses, you're able to track, who have those expenses and all of that, and the services for those expenses. And I wonder why and how that one doesn't happen, since there's no any metrics for that.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
So even though this is a little out of context, I mean, I think the hard part about financial management is that it doesn't mean that we're collecting unique student data, and that's what that question was asking. So, but as far as metrics goes, as far as financial data, yes, absolutely. There's tons of data that I think that position can provide, but it wouldn't be as detailed in this certain circumstance with the unique students, and that's mostly due to not having areas collected. Well, some areas are collecting it, but not universally collecting that data.
I think the other part for me, and this is the hard part with the way that it's split, since we went just alphabetically, is keeping in mind that this program review is for the one position of Student Fund Financial Manager. We have another program review for CERT Accounting, which is the larger office and program within it. And so I think there's still those challenges with the metrics and data, but also keeping in mind that this is just the one position who, while they assist in overseeing CERT Accounting, their other main role is to provide support to S&A.
Do we all have to abstain since we're S&A? I'm just kidding.
Right, yeah. I will say this, Integer, also this is for the last one. I appreciate how well you have all done, especially because there are at least 3, and depending on when Amber and them left, maybe 4 of these program reviews that we've been discussing with the individuals who manage them in the room and presenting. So I appreciate you all, and for the people taking in the feedback as well. But any other specific to the Student Funds Financial Manager questions or feedback, information you'd like to see in future program reviews? And as with all of them, and this may be with this one too, you always can provide questions or feedback you all think of later via email, especially when you take this one and look at the CERT Accounting one. If there's pieces that you're like, hey, now that I looked at that, I do have a question, we can bring it up next week, but you can also send them to me via email on this or any of them. Awesome. Seeing none, I think that wraps it up for these. We have our last 11, which again, I sent the email to you all previously, so you see them. You'll see it on the agenda when we get closer for our last meeting. But I appreciate your thoughtfulness in going through this and asking the questions. In my opinion, I think it's also helpful for these units as we give them the feedback. So that way, hopefully, information for us this year, but also for the program reviews in the future years, we'll provide some of that data. So other than that, I think we're done with program reviews, Stephanie.
Okay, so then we'll move on to the second public comment for this meeting. Anybody has a public comment to make? Seeing none, we can move on to adjournment. Does anybody motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Judy motions. Does anybody second?
Before maybe probably my last comment for the night, I just want to say thank you for acting swiftly on the ESC request. That was pretty incredible in such a short time. We gladly and very thankfully appreciate you for your flexibility and acting on time.
Thank you, Joffrey. Does anybody want to second Judy's motion for adjournment? Andrea seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 6, 7, 8. All those not in favor?
I think that's everybody.
Yeah, so do we just move on with the
Yep.
motion pass? Okay,
Yep.
motion passes 8-0-0.
Meeting adjourned 7:17. Thank you all. Have a great evening and a great 2 weeks. And we'll see you for our last meeting coming up on the 18th. Bye all.
Bye.